You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Mark, I've got a Stack Waddy game for you. If you're in the
Splendid.
market.
Fire away.
5 names here, 5 cases of unlikely casting in musical biopics. Okay? 4 of them are real. 1 is my own invention. Here we go. Are you ready? Roger Daltrey as Franz Liszt. Roger Daltrey as Franz Liszt. Al Pacino as Phil Spector. Al Pacino as Phil Spector. Gary Oldman as Joe Strummer. Gary Oldman as Joe Strummer. Matt Damon as Liberace. And Sissy Spacek as Loretta Lynn. Which one of those is pure invention?
That's good. That's good. Matt Damon as Liberace, I've seen.
Good film.
I've seen that. It's a really good film. It's a fantastic film, actually. And Sissy Spacek as the coal miner's daughter, I think
another good film.
Is another good film. So that's those 2 crossed off. Gary Oldman as Joe Strummer. Al Pacino as Phil Spector. That exists, I'm sure. As does Roger Daltrey as Franz Liszt. I don't know why I'm saying that, but I just kind of have it in my head. I can picture it. It looks like something out of Barry Lyndon. And I think it's probably Gary Oldman as Joe Strummer, actually.
You win. You win.
Oh.
This was actually triggered by my seeing that Al Pacino played Phil Spector. I thought, my God, I never knew that happened. So Al Pacino did indeed play Phil Spector on an HBO biopic called Spector, opposite Helen Mirren, who played his lawyer.
Oh, my Lord.
And I thought, they sound made up casting choices to me. Al Pacino as Phil Spector.
That's great.
But clearly I missed it and you didn't. So
wearing a succession of presumably absurd wigs, looking like an exploded mattress.
Absolutely. They had the wigs lined up right across the studio. Absolutely.
Because Spector's wigs got more and more extravagant, didn't they?
They did. They did. Okay. Well,
we were talking about wigs, weren't we? Possible wig wearers the other day.
We were, weren't we?
We were talking about people who dye their hair and people who wear. See, it's unkind to say this,
but we're going to say it nonetheless.
But we're going to say it anyway. But Cliff Richard, I'm sorry, Dave, is that a syrup?
Is it really?
Is it a toupee? I really don't know. The top of his hair looks a different colour from the rest of it. I don't know. But then you sent me a picture of Dylan, and Dylan clearly doesn't wear a syrup, but he does dye his hair, and it doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right to me.
His hair is that strange shade that McCartney's was.
That kind of henna
when
thing,
he went in for henna, you know.
Bill Wyman had the same thing for a while.
And this is a picture. So Bob Dylan is how old, Mark? 83?
82.
Is that right?
82.
Okay. And this is a picture taken of him at the end of a show the other day. He's touring in the States at the moment. And he just looked absurd. The hair just looked absurd. Now, I know he's an 82, 83-year-old bloke, so he's not going to look smooth-featured and so forth. But, the hair is a problem. And particularly it made me think of, it's round about 60 years this year since Bob Dylan kind of entered my life, really. There's probably making his first visits to the UK and so forth, and there were always the keen interest in the emergence of this thrusting young protest singer amongst the kind of the serious media. And you know what the line he used to sing in, I think it's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, that used to stand out so much that it used to get a round of applause. Do you know what that line was? I'm going to tell you, Mark, it was, even the President of the United States someday must have to stand naked. And people used to applaud that because it seems an extraordinarily provocative thing to say. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, the man who wrote that line 60 years later is ladling on the Grecian 2000 or whatever it is prior to going on stage, where he will appear in darkness anyway, so nobody's going to see whatever he's done, and presumably...
I don't know why he's done it, because he had a brilliant ruse about maybe 10 or 15 years ago that all the band used to wear black cowboy hats, and he used to wear a white one.
Oh, yeah,
and
true.
that's kind of how you identified if you were miles away at the O2 or whatever, that was Bob Dylan. And I thought that was a really brilliant move. And also, if you are a bit embarrassed about the fact you're looking a bit craggy, then a big cowboy hat with a big brim is quite a good way of, and also being lit, rather sensitively, can mask that. But I don't know why he's done it. McCartney always used to say, I dyed my hair because in the distance, playing festivals or whatever, I still look, I got the Nero jacket, I got the Hofner bass, I still kind of look like Paul McCartney. But actually, he stopped dyeing his hair and he looks so much better.
So much better.
Oh, my God. I was thinking about this the other day. Certain people do look fantastic with undyed hair, don't you think? John McLaughlin in his 80s.
John McLaughlin is, I think, 81, and he's on tour. And John McLaughlin, I know we said this before, he's a lesson to us all in the macrobiotic diet that he's presumably been existing on for the last 40 or longer than 40 years. He's obviously his regime of, I don't know, meditation or whatever he does. And also, the interesting thing about John McLaughlin, shall I tell you the other thing that always looks really good about him? Whenever you see him photographed, he's smiling.
Yeah.
He's always smiling. He's always looking like, I'm really happy to be here.
He's got a lot to smile about, I think.
A lot to smile about.
Yes.
He looks absolutely fantastic. So, if you're going to do a list of the kind of 80-plus division of rock stars, I mean, Macca's quite high in that, but John McLaughlin is my clear leader.
He's fantastic
in the 80-plus division.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think the clear winner, actually, and a really good example of someone who's always unbelievably good looking, but has got better looking over the years, Joan Baez. Joan Baez these days looks absolutely staggering, I think. And in the 70s, Peter Frampton looks great. But then again, he's got the advantage of starting off by looking like Peter Frampton in the first place.
He has
undyed hair. Tell you who else? David Byrne looks ridiculously good.
Really? Yes, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, silver hair.
How old is David Byrne?
David Byrne would be 70.
Is he that old?
72?
Okay. Oh,
I think
right.
so.
Well,
I think so.
Okay.
Emmylou Harris still looks fantastic.
Emmylou Harris looks sensational. Nick Lowe looks fantastic.
Jimmy Page.
Yes,
he looks so much better. There was a stage when he used to dye his hair black and he's got it tied back. He looks fantastic. He looks like a sort of, 18th century highwayman now. It's very good.
Talking members of Led Zeppelin, when you look at Robert Plant nowadays, Robert Plant looks fantastic, but he kind of looks like a burly old Shakespearean actor, doesn't he now? He's got to that point where he looks as if he ought to be a long-time member of the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Yeah.
He's probably played Falstaff in the past, Falstaff's in the rearview mirror.
Yes.
But he looks like a kind of stout yeoman figure, doesn't he?
He does, leaning on a stick. That's right.
He ought to be the Duke of Buckingham who comes on and, alarums and, and what news from the front, my liege?
What manner of country is this, sirrah? The huge, with maybe a pewter beer jug hanging from a leather belt.
Hanging from a leather belt in an exit pursued by a bear at the end of it. At the end of the set, yeah. So, there still are some people that are an example to us all in just how good they look. But we're saying, Bob, step away from the dye.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
So 60 years ago this month, since the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and you and I are old enough gits to kind of remember where we were and how we heard about it.
Really vividly.
Where were you?
Well, I was at home. My dad used to work in London. He came back on the train with a copy of the Evening Standard.
Oh, right.
And it was the London Evening Standard. He bought at Waterloo Station, and there was the headline. And I can remember I was 9, I think. And I remember I was thinking that this is 10, I suppose. And this was a serious thing. And my parents talking very gravely about it.
But Friday evening, I was at home with my mother. I think my father must have been still at work. And I think she'd heard something on the radio. She said, just put the television on, I think, or something. and turns on the television to say shots had been fired at motorcades. And somehow I had the idea that it was kind of a traffic thing, or it was a crash or something like that. You know, I don't think I ever knew the expression assassinate and so forth. It was so foreign to our experience. But anyway, you know, within half an hour or an hour, it was clear that he'd been shot and he was dead. And then followed a weekend when we just sat in front of the television. And the television was all kind of grave discussions and classical music recitals, recordings of, you know. So sort of normal programming was shelved. And so we sat watching it all Saturday, and we were still watching it on Sunday, when, of course, Lee Harvey Oswald was shot live on television, which is still absolutely...
I think it was, wasn't it? When the cameras were rolling, weren't they?
Absolutely, they were rolling. And I've just been reading Vincent Bugliosi's book, Parkland, which is a kind of minute, sort of minute-by-minute recounting of the events of those 4 days, right up to the funeral and so forth. The funeral was on the Monday. And I came upon a little thing in a footnote which I thought would appeal to you and the listeners, and so I'm going to share it now. So when Lee Harvey Oswald was transferred from the Dallas police headquarters to go to the county jail on the Sunday, they were taking him down in the lift down into the basement of the headquarters. And there were loads of newspaper men and radio and television cameras there and so forth. And in those days, Dallas had 2 daily newspapers. And so the daily newspapers were represented by their reporters and also their photographers. So they had 2 photographers. And in those days, it's before motor drives on cameras. So these photographers are both lining up thinking, well, he's going to come out of a lift there and then he's going to come here and disappear into a police wagon there. I probably only got an opportunity to take 1 picture. And so they line up. Oswald comes out of the lift, is moved towards the camera. And you can hear people in the background, he's here, he's here, he's here. One photographer closes his shutter. Then the other photographer closes his shutter half a second later. The first photographer gets a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald surrounded by minders. The second photographer gets the picture of him being struck by the bullet.
That's right.
And grimacing. The second photographer wins the Pulitzer Prize. The first photographer is haunted by this for the rest of his life.
Half a second out.
Probably less than.
Oh, my Lord.
You know, because you've only got 1 opportunity. Can you imagine if you're a press photographer, particularly those days, you know, how you just, you've just got 1 opportunity, haven't you?
That is a fantastic story. Oh, my God. I've got a feeling John Peel invaded
he was there.
Into that. Yeah,
he was there.
I remember interviewing him and he told me that, he was there.
He wasn't there at the shooting. He was there, I think he was there on the Friday or the Saturday, when they were hauled. Oswald was kind of brought into...
That's what he brought into the press there.
Question.
He got in by just pretending he was from a Dallas newspaper, and he had an English accent. He said he was covering it for England. I'm not sure he didn't write a little piece, actually. I think he did.
Yeah.
But, that's incredible.
Isn't that something? So anyway, you were going to say something about Led Zeppelin. We were talking about Led Zeppelin earlier.
Well, Led Zeppelin, there was just a story which I thought was a kind of complete non-story at first, actually. It was about, I saw it in The Guardian, then I saw it in New York Times, I saw it was getting picked up all over the place, that they had discovered the identity of the person on the cover of Led Zeppelin 4. And I thought this was a bit of a non-story, because I was thinking, well, they would have just, if anybody really wanted to know, why didn't they get hold of Hypnosis or whoever it was that designed it and ask them? But actually, of course, nobody knew. Because Robert Plant had found that picture. That's the picture, everybody listening will remember it. It's of the old man stooped with a load of, well, they're reeds, really, Thatcher's reeds, in a bundle on his back. And there's no words on the sleeve. There's nothing saying it's Led Zeppelin or the name of the record or anything. There's no indication of what that picture, well, they didn't know. But Plant just had it and they liked it. And but no, what was happening was that a researcher called Brian Edwards from the University of West England was going through some old Victorian photo album in some research capacity. And he said he suddenly recognised his familiar face. And there was a caption saying this guy was called Lot Long.
Yes.
He was born in Mere, which is near whatever it is. It's Wiltshire. It's near Salisbury, I suppose. Shaftesbury. It's near Shaftesbury. That's right, yeah. In 1823. And he was a Wiltshire Thatcher. He died in 1893. And that was his identity. I thought it was really amazing, actually, that this tiny little picture that he was so familiar all over the world, no one had the faintest idea who he was. And there have been lots of other examples of that, haven't there?
This is so interesting because it's the kind of thing that can only happen with the cover of a 12-inch LP. It doesn't apply on CDs at all. It doesn't apply on cassettes. It doesn't apply on the covers of books. It's that you, as a member of the public, if you like, could somehow appear on the cover of an album that could go round the world and remain in people's consciousness for decades. And you could, as a consequence, become famous, even though you didn't know it was happening at all. And the classic case of this is the guy on the cover of the Beatles' Abbey Road. If you look in, I think on the right-hand side of the road.
Yeah, there's a guy on the pavement, isn't there?
There's a guy on the pavement. There's a police car, a police van. And then in front of it, there's a guy on the pavement who's turning and looking at the photographer and looking at what's going on. And this was an American tourist, wasn't it? And I think he only died about 10 years ago or something.
Yeah, quite recently.
And when he died, there was an obituary in the New York Times.
Brilliant idea.
His great claim to fame,
of course,
was he'd been on the cover of Abbey Road, which is absolutely extraordinary. The other one is, what is it?
But also, just if you hold that thought, he would have had no idea what was going on.
No.
He would have, maybe he knew it was the Beatles, maybe not. He didn't look terribly hip, did he?
No.
But anyway, he would have got back at some stage in his life. Somebody would have said, have you seen this record? And he said, oh, I was there one day when, hang on a second, you know what I mean? And he would have suddenly realised that was him, which is incredible, don't you think?
It is. And what's the other one we were talking about? The ball,
there's the Bengali balls, the Indian musicians who were brought over by, I think it was by Grossman, wasn't it? Albert Grossman, who managed Dylan. Because that's the cover, this is an amazing cover of John Wesley Harding. It's the most random cover ever. There is Bob Dylan. He's got these two Indian musicians with him who are not on the record and not credited, no one knows who they are. And behind him, he's a local stonemason and carpenter
that's right,
called Charlie Joy, who just happens to be in the picture. And in fact, as Sid Griffin once pointed out to us on a podcast, you can see the cowboy hat below them of somebody else in the picture, who's obviously crouching down. So it's a completely random snap. But for some reason, Dylan just thought, and it works, that I'm going with that. That's the picture I like. And when I bought that record, and I was whatever, 12, a bit older, 14. I thought that must be the band. I assumed that was Kenny Buttrey and Charlie McCoy, and I think whoever the guy was who played the steel.
Right.
There's one other. There were four musicians credited on the record. I think I just assumed that was the band. It's extraordinary.
And and still, I mean, the Balls of Bengal, known in the world of kind of folklore, I suppose, but that's what made them world famous. Just the idea, that people got to know over a long period of time. That's who they were, you know. And the other thing that strikes me about the discovery of the chap on the cover of Led Zeppelin 4 is there will be no more mysteries in popular music, will there? Because they will all be...
They'll all be uncovered eventually.
They'll all be solved. They'll all, absolutely, every last one will be solved. Because look how long that has taken. So that record came out...
52 years ago.
52 years later, some academic looking through a load of stuff, goes, hang on, and then goes, and does all the legwork and works out who it is. So they'll, and I'm going to quote once again what Tom Waits said. He said, before the internet, we used to wonder. I miss the wondering.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
I saw the first episode, in fact, of the Robbie Williams documentary on Netflix. It's sort of part of Ridley Scott's production, which is really interesting, actually, because actually in some ways it's quite similar to the David Beckham. They're quite similar, two kind of working class guys about the same kind of time and huge amounts of success and a lot of grief from the outside world. But the Robbie Williams one, it's a very claustrophobic picture. Mostly he sits there, interviewed on his bed in his underpants and just a T-shirt, reviewing his life on a laptop, looking at his life back and commenting on it, And it's just extraordinary. There's things that I didn't quite take on board. One was that he was only 16 when he joined the group. Did you know that? He was 16?
No, I didn't.
So he was 4 or 5 years younger than some of the others. He's obviously
really? Was he really?
Yeah. There was one of them, I can't remember which one, Howard, I think, is about 5 years older than him, nearly 6 years older than him. So that makes a real difference, actually.
It does.
Obviously, completely emotionally unable to cope with it. He's very resentful of the fact that Gary Barlow is the one who is kind of properly managed. Gary Barlow is the goose that lays the golden eggs. Yeah. He's the one who's writing the songs. And he becomes incredibly jealous of his talent and resentful and constantly trying to kind of trip him up, And it gets to the point where he's drinking a bottle of vodka before he goes into rehearsals, and they just kind of sling him out of the group. You think, this is extraordinary. So then you go from this. We always say George Harrison was only 26, 27 when the Beatles ended. This guy was only 21. So he's 21 years old and his career has ended. And then he tries to write songs and he gets to go to Guy Chambers and they produce a record and he doesn't do very well. Then he has Angels as a hit. And then you have this incredible bit where he's going out and playing to 88,000 people at Glastonbury. And you see him going on stage and he's absolutely terrified because this is the kind of world centre of kind of indie rock, isn't it? Of left field rock. And there's this pop star going on. And he wins them over, And it just made me think that his life is for most pop stars, is either worrying about this sense of failure or briefly celebrating some kind of success while desperately thinking how on earth you can sustain it. Yeah. And I thought how unenviable it was. I mean, we absolutely love these people. And they entertain us and they make life thoroughly. They improve everything. But you think, how many of them would you change places with? Can you think of any musicians who you'd actually literally swap your life with? Because I only think about one or two. I mean, I remember thinking someone like Christine McVie had done a great life. And she'd been in Fleetwood Mac and she'd retired. She was going to be rattling around in a big old house.
And then came back.
But then she came back. She just couldn't quite deal with it. It's like Bill Berry. Bill Berry retired and became a kind of farmhand on the hay farm that he had in Georgia. I noticed that Bill Berry actually came back about a year ago, formed a little super group called the Bad Ends. Can't keep away.
I was talking to Peter Carlin, who's a friend of the pod, American, Portland, Seattle-based, writer. And I was asking you about Bill Berry, because he's working on a book about R.E.M., I think. And I asked him about Bill Berry. And he said, he's in about 5 groups. He just plays in the locality. He's perfectly happy doing that, so he's got his ton of money, they're not going to be forced to go back on the road. And I suppose that's come to us.
That does sound quite enviable, actually, because he doesn't want to get back involved. No, like Stuart Copeland's another one. Stuart Copeland's done great stuff, I think, and he's just very employable and just looks as though he doesn't have any great chip on his shoulder about stuff. I don't know. But there aren't many. The one I think I really envy is Donald Fagen. Donald Fagen's got this thing where I can't imagine he's constantly, recognised. He's not required to be self-promotional all the time. He's achieved fantastic stuff. He's written a wonderful book. And I just imagine that Donald Fagen's sitting around drinking martini, having impossibly witty conversations with people at dinner.
I think politics. I think he's on tour, actually. I think you'll find.
No, is he really?
I think you'll find he's on tour as Steely Dan. he is Steely Dan nowadays. And they will be playing some casinos somewhere, with members of the Boz Scaggs band or whatever.
Yeah.
A bunch of blokes in their 70s, because that's what they want to do more than anything else. And also, the other thing about musicians is, in my experience, they're rubbish at home. They clutter up the place. They cannot deal with home.
Feet.
Yeah.
They don't want to wash up and cook, and why should they?
No.
They just want people looking after them and making fuss them for all day.
And they want people to look at them, and acclaim them. It's a kind of, once you've had that, I think it must be very, very difficult to turn your back on it. But in terms of, swapping my life, I don't know, because I can't thinking that I'd have to tell my wife that I'm swapping. You know what I mean? You're going to get Randy Newman's going to move in and I'm going to move out.
That's right. I think you'd have to factor all that out. It's a straight life swap. Don't complicate these things by worrying about pension plans and grandchildren.
No.
There's nobody that you just think that would be a perfect. That's because the thing about Donald Fagen, I feel he's got nothing to prove. Most people, I feel like even with McCartney a lot. Actually, there's McCartney. We've talked about this pod many times. McCartney, what a fantastic life, etc. But he is obsessed with the idea of maintaining it, isn't he?
Yeah,
maintaining his profile, keeping going, keeping in the public eye. And the people you envy are the people who can quite happily just knock it on the head and think, I've done what I set out to do, and I'm happy.
Yeah. Well, Leonard Cohen, famously, he didn't he kind of retired, in his 50s or something?
He did.
And went and lived on Mount Baldy in California with a load of monks, didn't he, really?
He did.
I'm just going to devote myself to contemplation, spiritual pursuits. And then
somebody came up the mountain and tapped him on the shoulder, woke him from his reverie, and said two things. Firstly, what's the meaning of life? And secondly, bad news. Your accountant's legged it with $6 million or whatever, and you're broke. So you're going to have to go on the road, which is the best thing that ever happened to him.
And then he then immediately switched tack quite happily, didn't he?
He did.
Let's go on the road. Let's make more money than I've ever made before, because people are now paying more and it's easier to go on the road and the technology is better and so forth. And he made so much money, he couldn't give it up, could he really?
No.
He just kept touring and touring. I don't know if I've discussed with you, because I talked to David Remnick, the New Yorker editor, about his book, which was largely a collection of pieces that appeared in the New Yorker about legendary musicians, Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, and so forth, in their third age, in their retirement or semi-retirement. And one of the most telling pieces in there is about Leonard Cohen. And he was introduced to Leonard Cohen by a mutual acquaintance or something. Somebody that Leonard Cohen had a lot of time for. And so he went and spent time with Leonard Cohen, who had stopped being on the road, but it was kind of living in a house in Los Angeles, I think, being pretty much kind of managed by his son and his daughter, who they all lived around the corner, Yeah. It was like a compound devoted to kind of maintaining the celebrity and the life of the great father figure of the family. And anyway, he went and spent time with Leonard Cohen, and Leonard Cohen was just absolutely brilliant. His kind of his take on things was endlessly interesting he was fantastic. Radio 6 Music very sweetly repeated a 2007 interview I'd done with him for Radio 2 on the anniversary of his death, which was on Tuesday of last week. And I dug out the old copy of Word that I'd written it up in, actually, and just to have a look at it. He was so extraordinary. Asked him various things. I did this thing, I told you this, when I met him, I bought a copy of a book of his poetry,
And I slid it across the table and said, look, my wife absolutely adores you. And, you know, I've been very happily married for 25 years. And if you were to sign this to my wife, I'd be very happily married, guaranteed for another 25 years. And he had the good grace to pretend this doesn't happen all the time. He looked kind of surprised and touched, you know. But I asked him various things. I asked him, have we trained ourselves as a society to believe that melancholy produces better art? And this was his response, right? He says, nobody has a life that worked out the way they wanted it to work out. We all begin as the hero of our own dramas in centre stage, and inevitably life moves us out of the centre stage, defeats the hero, overturns the plot and the strategy. We're left on the sidelines wondering why we no longer have a part or want a part in the whole damn thing. So everyone's experienced this. When it's presented to us sweetly, the feeling moves from heart to heart, and we feel less isolated. We feel part of the great human chain, which is really involved with the recognition of defeat. That's a fantastic answer, isn't it? It's literally as he said it. It's all about fallibility. His thing is that fallibility is where we all meet.
You used to get similar responses from Ozzy Osbourne, I found. You know. That is fantastic.
Zodiac mind warp tends to.
That is fantastic. The David Rainnook was telling me, he's written about this in his book, give him huge points for writing about this in his book. He made an arrangement with Leonard Cohen to meet him the following day, or they were going to have a break, and then he was going to meet him the following day at an appointed time. And so he turned up at the appointed time to find that Leonard had expected him an hour earlier. And then he was on the receiving end of the mother and father of a dressing down from Leonard Cohen. How dare you waste my time? You know, my time is really precious. And David, the editor of the New Yorker, Pulitzer Prize winner himself, actually, had to stand there like a naughty schoolboy and just take it from Leonard Cohen. And I thought
it's funny because you'd think of Leonard Cohen as being incredibly philosophical and forgiving.
No, not at all. You see, that's the thing about all these guys. You know, Paul McCartney, Bob Dylan, any of these people, they take themselves very seriously.
Oh yeah. Also, the other thing was he's so competitive. And again, I was being really naive. I thought he can't be competitive. Leonard Cohen, just sitting there chewing a feather quill, dipping it into the ink whenever he feels the muse is visiting him. Not remotely. He talked about how he'd had a conversation with Bob Dylan, and he asked Bob Dylan, he said, how long did it take you to write songs? Which is the kind of questions that songwriters ask each other. Fair enough. Yeah. And Dylan said, I don't know. I said, hey, sometimes I can do it in 15 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, And he said he was mortified because it had taken him eventually 5 years to write Hallelujah. I mean, obviously, this was something he kept putting down and picking up again and again. It was 5 years to produce the 80 verses of Hallelujah. He was so competitive. He talked about how Columbia didn't put out one of the records that had Hallelujah on it. They just didn't tell him didn't put it out. He went to look at their schedule and it wasn't there. He told me about living with Joni Mitchell. They had this love affair and they lived together briefly in Los Angeles. And he said, I said, how is it living with Joni Mitchell? He said, it was like living with Beethoven. He said it was absolutely agony. He said, in the morning, she'd get up in the morning and kind of paint a fantastic portrait, and then sit down at the piano, or the lute or something, or the guitar, and just knock out some absolute masterpiece. Then go off and have lunch, and you just think this is just awful.
You remember that story of when Joni Mitchell met Graham Nash for the first time?
Oh yeah.
So it's like in late 60s or whatever. Graham Nash, I think he's still in the hole. He's probably at this point. Yeah. He finds himself in Canada and she's there. And it's arranged that they will meet. And she comes to his hotel room with a guitar and plays pretty much 12 songs.
Yeah.
She plays, I don't know which Song to the Seagull and Clouds and, probably Both Sides Now and, that song about the Medway and the Midway. Sorry, not the Medway.
Yeah.
You just thought, at that stage, she's not really all that famous, although she's kind of getting there. But just imagine, what kind of drive do you have to sit down in front of another musician and say, I'm now going to hit you with 12 songs that are going to make you feel like giving up? You know what I mean? Because what's he going to do at the end of it? Go, and here's King Midas in reverse.
Well, he did feel like giving up. I've interviewed him. He told me it was absolutely heartbreaking. She would roll out of bed, sit at the piano, bang out some tune. And he just thought, this is terrible. And actually, he was far better to know than she was at the time. Yeah. But he could just feel he was being overtaken,
But, go on.
I was going to say one more Leonard Cohen line. I asked him for his favourite line in any song and why. And he said, my favourite line was in Blueberry Hill. It's just so good. He says, which Fats Domino actually didn't write, did he actually? But anyway.
Dave Bartholomew wrote it, I think.
Was it Vincent Rose, Larry Stock? Can't remember. Somebody, anyway.
Right,
and he said, the moon stood still on Blueberry Hill. He said, you can just see that full moon suspended. You just want to gaze at it. It stops the mind spinning. I think what we like about music and what we like about art in general is that enterprise where it stops our minds from spinning, because we're always all over the place. And a good song and a good lyric is a movie. It will focus and calm and confer significance on this completely bewildering reality that all of us live in. That's such a good answer, don't you think? It's just wonderful.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
And we're joined by another birthday guest, Peter Pettit. Peter, very nice to see you. And happy birthday. It's today, is it? Is that right?
It is today. It is a big birthday. It is the 60th birthday. So we've a mere youngster, as people were saying.
Yeah, I dimly remember that.
Do you? Yeah, only a couple of years ago. So we are down in San Diego, where my daughter is at university. But my fantastic wife has organised this whole weekend of festivities. So we're going to go to the horse races today. We're going to go hiking tomorrow. We're going to do all sorts of things which she's organised. When we have people who've come in from the East Coast, West Coast, sounds like a Beach Boys song, doesn't it? UK. So we have about 35 people here who are very kindly committing to me and joining me and everything. So I'm
good for you.
Very
that's brilliant.
We feel privileged to be part of it.
Well, I hope this is the highlight.
So this is clearly the highlight of what is otherwise going to be a very dull weekend.
It is. Horse racing in San Diego, please. Boring.
It is your opportunity to throw a log on the fire, which is the ever rumbling discourse of word in your ear. What do you want to raise?
Well, it's just an observation, really, from a couple of concerts that we've been to this year, both very different in their own way, but they had a similarity. So the first concert was Rod Stewart in Las Vegas in May. Right. Rod Stewart in Vegas always sounds slightly incongruous, and it was in many ways, because you had a sort of, however old he is, with all these showgirls on the stage. And
oh, really? He had showgirth? Oh, brilliant.
Yes, he had showgirls. It was very
in his elements.
Very Vegas. He chose the soundtrack very much with the audience in mind. So there wasn't a version of Sailing, for example, because Sailing was never popular over here.
No,
but some of the others were big hits. But what was even more incongruous was the fact that the audience there was a lot of people in tuxes and long evening dresses and things like that. But there were pockets of very animated and loud Celtic fans.
You're right.
Who basically were there it was the following day, I think it was about 4:30 in the morning Vegas time. Celtic were about to win the Premier League in Scotland. Oh, right. And as you know, Rod Stewart's a huge Celtic fan. Certainly. So you had this kind of overriding sense that he just wanted to get off stage and get a couple of hours tip before getting up to watch Celtic win the Premier League, which they duly did. But as I say, it was rather weird having all these kind of quite well-dressed people and these pockets of Celtic fans in their Celtic shirts who were very animated and enjoying themselves at the time. The other one that we went to not that long afterwards was Noel Gallagher at the Greek Theatre in Los Angeles. And this was the night before Manchester City won the Champions League in Europe. And Noel Gallagher is not shy of showing his Manchester City credentials. So there was a mannequin of the manager Pep Guardiola on stage, very visible. There was also a big flag that was draped over the drum set. We had a very disgruntled Manchester United fan sitting behind us who was not happy at all at this overt display. But we also knew that Noel was playing in San Diego the night afterwards. So we were trying to work out, where's he going to watch the match? And we thought, well, he probably won't risk staying in LA and then having to get down there, especially if they've won. So our assumption was he might go to San Diego and watch it maybe in a hotel room or something like that. But indeed, about an hour before the match, Twitter footage of him in a bar with the fans in San Diego started to emerge. Yeah. And this, lots and lots of people were posting selfies with him and, his reactions during the match. Of course, they won. So it ended up with this huge impromptu karaoke session of Don't Look Back in Anger, with Noel leading the chorus. Absolutely. There's plenty of footage of that on Twitter. I sent Alex
I've seen
a link to one of them, which is absolutely fantastic. We kind of regret not taking the chance and sort of driving down to San Diego and seeing if we could find out which bar he was in. But I suppose my log therefore is, having experienced that, can both of you remember a particular concert or occasion where sport was a dominating theme?
Well, on the Celtic front, I can remember seeing Simple Minds playing Ibrox Park in 1986. I think we were making a little film for Old Grey Whistle Test, and them raising an Irish flag, which is extremely controversial because, of course, it's a Rangers stadium, and the roots of Celtic are actually Irish. So that was pretty good. But apart from that, not really. I mean, I remember seeing Rod Stewart kicking footballs into the crowd at some festival. I think it was Wheelie. But Dave, were you there when Elton John played at Watford?
I was at Watford when Elton John had just become chairman, I think. This must have been about 1974, 75. And he did a benefit, I think, for Watford at Vicarage Road. And on a Sunday afternoon, I think I'm right in saying. And he did the entire performance dressed in a hornet suit, which is, of course, the kind of, the Watford mascot, So I couldn't help thinking that was a pretty strange thing for a pop star to do. He didn't just wear it at the beginning; he wore it all the way through. I think I'm right in saying
it had a big spike in the tail, didn't it?
Your Song and Candle in the Wind and everything, still played by a man dressed as a hornet. And the other thing that Mark and I were just talking about is that 1966 when England won the World Cup. British pop music conquered the world. English pop music conquered the world. And yet, find me a single picture of a British pop star alongside Bobby Moore, Martin Peters, Jeff Hurst. Those two things were in completely different worlds in those days.
And it wasn't fashionable. We were saying it wasn't really fashionable at the time. And also Bobby Charlton particularly didn't really look young and fabulous. He looked kind of an older generation compared with the kind of people who might have wanted to pose with him. That all happened after they won the World Cup. That was the next World Cup along in 1970.
Well, and also the interesting thing about England and the World Cup in 1966, there is no song. There is not an England song.
Right.
They
so that was 1970 that started.
1970 back home is where it started.
Yeah.
And it just gives you an idea of how kind of commercially underdeveloped sport was in those days. And whereas, he started to change in the late 60s. And who changed it first of all, before the Faces, is Pink Floyd, really. Because Pink Floyd always played a lot of football, didn't they? And isn't there one of their album covers got a picture of them lined up in kind of Arsenal gear, I think. They used to play on those pictures on Market Road in Islington. And
You'll Never Walk Alone, isn't that a period?
You'll Never Walk Alone, sung by the Liverpool crowd, isn't that on one of their albums? I think I'm right in saying.
It is.
And so when Liverpool won the European Cup, I remember John Peel starting his programme with playing that. But Rod Stewart, as you say, Rod Stewart was the first person to really make a big feature of it, kicking out the footballs and so forth. Now
it's compulsory.
Now
it's to support a team.
Everybody's got
a politician or a musician or anybody, actually.
Yeah.
You've got to support somebody.
It wasn't always like that. So, thanks for your log on the phone.
No, of course. And it's lovely to speak to you both, and thank you for entertaining us throughout the year.
Thank you. Well, thank you for being such a loyal supporter. Enjoy the terrible disappointment of the rest of your birthday celebration.
It'll all be downhill.
We will be toasting you guys and everyone else. It's a great day, so we're certainly going to have some fun. But thank you once again.
Fantastic.
All right.
Nice to talk to you, Peter.
Bye.
The Word Podcast. Clearly, there is no plan.
Okay, and we welcome another birthday Patreon supporter, Michael Sketch. How you doing, Michael? When was the birthday?
Very well, thank you, David. Thank you very much. The birthday was last Sunday, and relatively casual and calm affair, which befits the grand old age I'd reached, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, that's quite right. Nobody wants any surprises or anything like that. You do.
No, and one thing I've learned from you good gentlemen is that a good afternoon or evening out is preferable to a night out.
Definitely.
You don't want to start too late, and you don't want to finish too late either.
Absolutely, definitely.
Absolutely. I was talking to an old mate the other day who had a 66th birthday, who said they can only face one event during the day now, and then they just want to go home in the evening and just sit and watch the telly. I thought, that's fair enough. I totally understand.
Couldn't agree more.
It's traditional on these occasions that we invite you to throw a log on the fire of the Word in Your Ear discourse. What would you like to contribute?
Well, David, last year when we chatted, I'd just been to see ABBA. The Avatar show, which I don't know whether you've been yet.
No,
I'm afraid not, and I know I'd really like it if I did, and there's no excuse for not going, but I remember you talking about it. Yeah.
I think you would. So I was wondering whether we could discuss whether, who's going to be next, or indeed will there even be a next Avatar type show. I thought maybe, I think when Queen, or what's left of Queen, play live now, they have a kind of a duet with Freddie Mercury going on. Not sure, I haven't seen it myself, but I'm not sure whether that particularly works. And then I was struck by Madonna recently when I watched a couple of YouTube clips, who's singing at the O2 to a backing track. She's got dancers with her, but she's singing to a backing track now. Obviously reaching a fair old age herself. And then, of course, there's Sir Bob, who goes on. And, I guess the never-ending tour will come to an end at some point. And, of course, the Stones, now in their 80s and still going, but for how much longer? And I just wonder whether anybody else will do it.
But isn't it in the main sustained by the idea of theatre? The thing about ABBA is that's a fantastic show. There's something going on all the time. The two girls, the two blokes, all the paraphernalia. And Madonna would be perfect, but Beyonce would be perfect. Pet Shop Boys would probably be perfect. But it's people like Bob Dylan. I just can't imagine you could sustain people's interest because there's none of that. Stones, possibly, actually, because there's props and there's backdrops and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. What do you think, Dave? Does it suit rock music?
I can't help but wonder if ABBA is the only case of this where it works, because there's just something about ABBA. There's sort of glorious symmetry of ABBA. Two blokes, two girls,
all the same height,
all knocked it on the head when they were 35 or something like that, and left us with that idea of this is what they are. They're in their early 30s. Forevermore, and that can be preserved, and also their songs. It strikes me as time goes by, their songs become more poignant than they were at the time.
Yeah,
and they just clearly just suit that kind of treatment in a way that I'd sit there and think the Jackson 5 or whatever, the Bee Gees. Could you do that? And I think
no, it hasn't got the depth.
I'm not sure you could.
Not
really.
the emotional depth.
No, I don't think it has. And also ABBA, they had one era, didn't they? Or it seemed to me. You could draw ABBA, couldn't you? Nobody would say, are you drawing late ABBA or early ABBA? It's ABBA. You know what I mean? Whereas even, the Bee Gees or whatever had loads of different eras. And, they were in their 20s and then in their 30s and their 40s and 50s, whatever. I just don't think quite lends itself to the same treatment. And also, when you come to the ticklish business of it costs a fortune to do this, therefore you've got to believe that you're going to get your money back. It's got to be somebody whose appeal is really wide, really broad.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, the eye-watering cost of it could be prohibitive. And I think, having been to see the ABBA one, I think the very fact that you haven't seen them on stage for a very long time, if at all, because
possibly ever,
absolutely. Yeah. And it was just jaw-dropping when they did appear. It was completely jaw-dropping. And, of course, they are all still alive and were able to participate in the making of it by donning the suits.
Which makes a difference.
Makes a huge difference.
Makes a difference to the way you feel about it.
That's another example of you've got to pick a group who would be prepared to choreograph a show themselves at that level, of which there can't be very many contenders.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly nobody rushing to do it, is there?
It doesn't seem to be, no.
It doesn't seem to be. I think the expense probably puts a lot of people off, But, I think these acts will stay with us, forever, really, because there is what's interesting to me about all this is the kind of hunger amongst the population to hear ABBA and to continue to enjoy those things. And they're more popular now, it seems to me, than they were in the 70s in their supposed pomp,
Yeah. The other thing
they now appeal to everybody, don't they? The kind of people who pretended not to like them at the time have been completely won over.
Yeah.
The other thing I wondered was, if you look at what U2 have just done, where they've got an enormous show, but if you see, I've watched the clips of it, and actually the stage and them is really quite small, tiny part of the show itself, and the show is really what's on the inside of that big globe thing, sphere.
Yes. Yeah,
and I wonder if that's where things are going in the future, where the actual people or the stage itself is tiny, but the effects and the performance, if you like, is in the filming.
It's the theme-park-ification of popular music. That's what it is.
That's the word. Theme-park-ification.
Theme-park-ification. It rolls off the tongue. That one does, doesn't it?
It does.
Watch this space, because there's going to be more of that kind of thing. Well, look, thanks very much, Michael, for
you're very welcome.
Throwing that log on the fire, and happy birthday as of last week. And, don't stay up too late tonight. Go to bed early. That's my advice.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.